Hello, this is Ken Alston with the Circularity Catalyst Podcast. Today I'm joined by Jonathon Porritt, one of Britain's most influential environmental thinkers, campaigners, and authors. For more than 50 years, his work has crossed green politics, sustainable development, business, climate action, and social justice.
It's very good to be here. Yeah, wonderful.
So, I've just finished writing the manuscripts for two books. So books are very much on my mind. I'm hoping mine are going to come out in September. I thought what we might do is, go back and use the chronology of your books to, catalog the history of your involvement in environment and politics and sort of, do a troll through history, if that's okay.
Good luck, Ken.
I remember reading that it was back in the mid 70s when you were given a copy of the Ecologist magazine. Was that like a trigger for your belief set? How did that?
It was the Ecologist magazine published a very short book, 82 pages or something, called The Blueprint for Survival. And I got hold of a copy of that in 1972 and 73 maybe. And then I joined what was then the Ecology Party in 1974. And I was 10 years working then with the Ecology Party. I was a teacher at the same time. So being a teacher, I had weekends and school holidays, so I could do politics on the side, as it were. And then in 1984, I went to Friends of the Earth. So that was the first stage of my kind of green life, as it were, which culminated, in fact, in the publication of my first book called Seeing Green in 1984.
I have it right here.
Oh my gosh, that's wonderful! You have the U.S. edition. I remember it.
Yeah, I have a rather extensive library.
Wonderful.
I'm an avid reader. When you go back in time, to those days, in the early days, what would you say was the belief set that was prevalent? Your belief set at the time, was it optimistic, pessimistic? What did you believe in fundamentally?
I saw no reason why we as in humankind, wouldn't be able to engineer a pretty good future for the whole of humankind. I mean, it's worth bearing in mind that the population of the world at that stage was 4 billion, roughly. We're now 8.3 billion. And perhaps more significantly than that, if you go back the whole of those 50 years, Ken, the total global GDP back in the early 1970s was about $6-7 trillion. And not only have we doubled the number of people on this planet in the intervening 5 decades, but of course we have massively grown total global GDP. And I think for 2025, it was something like $165 trillion. So if you want to sort of get one measure of how things have changed in 5 decades, the combination of that doubling of human beings and this vast multiplying of total global GDP, generating huge benefits to people, of course, but also massive externalities and damage to the environment. That would just about, I guess that would give you one measure of the way things have changed during that time.
And I think, more than many writers on the environmental scene, you've had the intersection with politics much more to the fore, I think, than most. Was that a very conscious thing in the early days?
Yes.
Or did it develop?
When I joined the Green Party, Ecology Party as it was then in 74, I was fairly convinced that the only way to make changes last was via people's vote, via the ballot box. I've continued with that view throughout that time, and I still believe that through democratic transformation lies the solution to many of our problems. Democracy is at terrible risk at the moment, Ken, as you know. I mean, We're seeing many countries now with their democratic safeguards profoundly weakened, not least, of course, the United States of America, where 250 years from its founding moment, as it were, I don't think its democracy's ever been in such peril. So democracy has to be fought for, and that means that much of the work that I do now, again, thinking about this over a 50-year span, I'm very involved in human rights work now and defending critical rights that people have: freedom of speech, freedom of assembly, freedom to make sure that everybody can continue to exercise their political rights without the kind of constraint and oppression that we see so in so many other places.
Yeah, one of my books is called Our Common Future Now. It's a play on the original Brundtland
Our
Report,
common future.
Our Common
Yes,
Future, which is, what triggered it in my mind a few years ago when I first thought about this as an idea was, this report's coming up to its 40-year anniversary next year in April.
indeed.
And so I thought, since I haven't been involved quite as long as you, almost 40 plus years, but I thought it was worth a look back just, for what it's worth from my perspective, having been involved in
Yep.
sustainability. My focus has been much more in business. I know yours has had that theme embedded in it too, and we'll talk about that in a minute. But what struck me is I've sort of been recently haunted, but probably just challenged over that whole time by a question which just gets harder and harder to answer each year, and it should be easier. And it's like, why are we less sustainable today than we were when we first started 40 or 50 years ago? On almost any measure. You gave us one measure there, and it's a terrible thing to have to say it that way.
Yeah, it is. And that, unfortunately, is indeed our reality. And I think if you look at that span, let's do the 40 years from the Brundtland Report, Our Common Future, which really gave birth to the notion of sustainable development,
Exactly.
sustainability as a concept. And of course, embedded in at the heart of the whole notion of sustainable development is this notion of intergenerational justice between generations. And from 87 through really to 2015, bit by bit, sustainable development became a bigger and bigger idea. I mean, it was obviously given a huge impetus through the Earth Summit in 1992. Absolutely critical moment in terms of laying down key international treaties, processes, and so on. And from that time on, from I guess the Earth Summit was that crucial a moment, 1992 through to 2015, where the Sustainable Development Goals were signed off by all governments around the world, with the very significant involvement of the business community. Sustainable development was probably the most powerful way of capturing what we were trying to do, which was to hang on to the idea of prosperity for humankind, but prosperity created in such a way that it didn't destroy prospects for future generations. And that meant prosperity within natural boundaries, within the natural carrying capacity of the earth. Now, from 2015 through to where we are today in 2026, sustainable development has largely disappeared from the lexicon. I mean, you don't really hear politicians refer to it any longer, certainly not here in the UK, a little bit still in Europe. It was never that big a deal in the US, actually, as a concept. It was there for a lot of people, particularly business, funnily enough. But it's been, the last decade has taken a terrible toll on the ideas and the practices of sustainable development. So it's mystifying why we've gone backwards rather than
Well,
forwards.
that's what I'm trying to answer in the new book. So I look forward to sending you a copy, and I'd
Right.
love to get your reaction. I mean, I think there's been a number of things happen. One is there's been a conflation of terms. Sustainable development as a term, as very precisely defined by the Brundtland Report, got conflated into general sustainability. And then, you mentioned the intergenerational piece. I think a 400-page report got condensed down to one sentence, which is at the beginning of page 43 of chapter 2, the famous quote that everyone has, that sustainable development is development meets the needs of the present without compromising the needs of future generations. But then people stop. But that was only the beginning sentence of the chapter. And the next sentence is probably the most critical one, because it talks about two concepts. right? And one was the essential needs of the poor. Where do you have people talking about that in business sustainability? You don't. And there was a hierarchy, and then the question of the limits, as you said, to on the earth, was also involved in the full definition.
Yeah,
So,
yeah.
and then the whole thing got amputated multiple times to the point at which, as you say, it became an irrelevance because it didn't have the original core elements to it. So yeah, I spent quite a bit of time in the book going into that. But it is a fact that it's disappeared. And I think the other thing that struck me was that the creation of the Sustainable Development Goals also flattened the topic. It ended up with your 17 different things that were all given equal weight, and yet the original definition had the essential needs of the world's poor as number one. I know it was number one in the list when they came out, but it was like one co-equal with 16 others. And then people just cherry picked the ones that they were interested in.
Well, I think the cherry picking preceded the Sustainable Development Goals, Ken, by a very,
Probably.
very big margin. I mean,
Yeah.
I think that, if it doesn't, I suppose, require digging a great deal deeper than that to explain why there's been no progress. The means chosen to address the needs of the poor and to create a more prosperous world, notionally within the carrying capacity of planet Earth, was conventional economic growth, growth as measured by GDP, exponential growth year on year, indefinitely into the future. And once that
Yeah.
is your principal measure of success, then by definition, you're going to end up with a depleted planet. And you also find that unless you explicitly then address the needs of the poor, that wealth will accumulate in the hands of fewer and fewer people. It will
Yeah.
not trickle down to create a fairer world.
Right.
The logic and the drivers of capitalism ensure concentration of wealth, which is what has happened. So we now have 3,428 billionaires, and next year we'll probably have 4,000 billionaires, and the number will keep on growing because once you've got a super wealthy elite of that kind, they know perfectly well how to secure their position and make sure their own individual wealth grows every year, and the number of the super elite grow every year. So we know why this has happened. More mystifying to a certain extent is why more people aren't enraged by what has
Right.
happened. That's still
Well, I think some of
completely.
that comes down to the sort of fundamental beliefs, and that's why I was asking in the beginning about your beliefs. Do you feel your beliefs have fundamentally changed over the 50 years or so of the work you've been doing? Have they changed and ebbed and flowed in different ways?
No, not really. I mean, I think I was very fortunate to have access to some of those writers in the early 70s because they were very clear about the need to combine these two things, biophysical sustainability and social justice, because they argued very eloquently even then that if you couldn't guarantee at least some fair distribution of wealth, no one would be interested in looking after the natural world. And on the other hand, on the other side of the coin, if you didn't look after the natural world, then clearly we wouldn't have the foundations for the kind of wealth that humankind aspires to. So I found myself to be in a very fortunate position very early in my political career that the central truth of what our species now needs to understand about its presence here on planet Earth was, if you like, part of my thinking very early on. And I've never moved away from that at all. I still have a commitment to the social justice side of things, and obviously still very involved in the climate and nature side of issues as well. So in that regard, I'm not trying to make out that I sort of have a absolutely fixed, unchanging view of the world and humankind. Not necessarily, but the constants, the sort of foundations have stayed the same.
Yeah, no, I can see the core. When you wrote capitalism as if the world matters,
Yeah.
which is sort of pro business in that sense, and I've been that way. I felt some of my core beliefs is that through business we could make the change that you've been talking about on all those fronts, on to do with sustainability and equity. and the environment. Would you say your views have changed on the role of business? Is it?
Yes, there you can definitely point to a change, because for me personally, that's been quite a painful process. I came back from the Earth Summit in 1992 and got very involved then in finding, I hoped, very positive, creative ways of working together with people involved in the business community, and was a co-founder of both Forum for Future and the Prince of Wales's Business and Sustainability Programme,
Yeah.
both in 1994. And for the next 30 years after that, I stuck with that notion that we can still call on the resources, creativity, and assets of the business community to be a positive, transformative force for good in the world today. And I guess for at least the first 20 years, I continued to believe that to be the case. After the 2008 financial crash, I was becoming rather less persuaded. And when we had a big change of government here in the UK in 2010, we elected the Conservatives and Lib Dems then as the government, and I watched how the idea of building a more sustainable economy for the future was just decaying in front of my eyes.
Nowhere to be seen. Yeah.
Nowhere to be seen. I then became much less persuaded, and I suppose from 2010 through to 2020, I became less persuaded that we could do this, because in the end, it's not the businesses that write the rules of the game they have to play. It is governments and politicians and international institutions that write the rules of the game. And I think business tried as best it could for quite a long time to make sustainable development a priority within those rules. But it's just become too difficult. And we had, as you know, 4 or 5 years ago, we started to see the pushback. Then Donald Trump arrived in the White House for his second term. And since then, the falling short, if you like, has been precipitous. We now see a business community in complete retreat away from the basic.
Yeah. No DEI.
Exactly. I mean, and it's been
Well, no anything. All the goals
no
have
anything.
quietly disappeared
No
off the
anything.
websites.
Exactly.
Yeah. I came to the US in 92 with that same sense that business could make a difference. I
Yeah.
was one of
Yeah.
the first corporate sustainability professionals. There wasn't a profession of sustainability inside
No.
businesses at the time. We were making it up as we go along. And so, yeah, I was there from the beginning. And I think one of the issues for me is that it all became about efficiency. It all became about eco-efficiency. If you could make more money by being environmental, it was fine. It never became about being effective. It was always about efficiency.
Well, I'm sure your bookshelves are groaning with books about corporate sustainability, Ken, like mine were.
Yeah,
But the reality is that the business case for sustainable development, which of course was the brainchild of the World Business Council for Sustainable Development back in 1991, it thrived as an idea up until that point where suddenly it got too difficult to square other interests, other concerns against the interests and concerns of shareholders. And at that
yeah,
point, the fiduciary duty of the boards of directors became overwhelming. And we saw what happens in a straight fight between the needs and interests of shareholders and any other any other stakeholder. It got very difficult. And you probably remember, Ken, that notion of shared value.
yeah,
The
yeah.
idea.
Well, and in the book, I have a short passage about BP because there was the classical, BP is now beyond petroleum, right?
Yeah,
And I'm sure that John Brown's beliefs were 100%, from the heart. That's what he felt at the time.
yeah. No,
I
I
don't,
agree. And I was working with BP and with John at that time. And
yeah,
I don't think I was being suckered. I
no,
think that John and several of his senior board directors and exec team believed the same, but not all of them. And the point was that there were many, many people in BP who said, we just need to stick to the knitting. We're a fossil fuel company. We're a
Yeah.
hydrocarbons business. That's where we know how to make the margins. Don't
Well,
give
and
us
there you
any
are.
of
You've just given their beliefs, which were not the same beliefs as John Brown,
exactly,
right?
exactly.
So that's why I come back to beliefs, and the company has a belief system, but it's embedded and hidden in the operating system of the business. And when you
Yeah,
look back at the numbers of BP, probably 5% of their capital allocation went to renewables, and the other 95 stayed where it always had been in the oil and gas. And
yes.
so
I think they actually got up to a little bit more than that in
did
terms of
they?
capital
Yeah,
allocation at one stage. But the truth of it is, of course, and here this is where the fiduciary duty does bite. They never made as good a rate of return
right.
on their renewable assets as they continue to do on their hydrocarbon assets.
Yeah.
Tricky
Yeah,
one.
it's definitely at the very least a conundrum.
It certainly is.
But do you have you lost heart completely, or do you think there's still ways for us to dig in and come back?
I haven't lost heart completely. And indeed, I continue to say that the work that is done by organizations like Forum for the Future, which is still doing good work, and the Cambridge Institute for Sustainability Leadership, all of these organizations are still doing really important work within the business community. And that work is still really important. We still need that because come the point where that model of wealth creation via profit maximization no longer delivers the goods for anyone, we're going to need business people to pick up the kind of running here and become proactive and much more progressive agents of change in an economy that will begin to look very differently. So I'm not in any way saying that this work was all a waste of time and we shouldn't have bothered about it and now we need to go somewhere completely different. It's just not the work I feel I can do any longer, Ken. After
Right.
30 years, I got pretty tired of explaining what the business case for sustainable
Yes,
development was and spent more and more of my time
I
talking
know the
about the
feeling.
moral case for sustainable
Yes.
development, which of course they didn't really want to hear about because they couldn't do very much about that in their terms.
Well,
So
it's
I haven't
interesting.
given up.
On social media now, I'm seeing more and more and more posts of people becoming dejected and saying, "Oh, look, all the corporate sustainability officers are being fired or let go or moved away." And there's a little bit of a tone, of defeatism, and I think we
Well,
do
it's
have
a
to
yeah,
buckle
but
down and try and find a new way.
yeah, I mean, it's probably easy for us to say that, Ken, as now a little bit older, perhaps, than some of those chief sustainability officers, not having to face up to some of those dilemmas, not dealing with whoever they report to bearing down on them, saying, well, this is all very well, but actually it's for the
Yeah.
birds because it's not contributing to our core commercial goals
Well, I
here.
know I've been there. I've been there for sure
Exactly.
in my corporate
Exactly.
life too. So, but I think the other thing is when you look at things like the circular economy, you've got. I did an interview with someone who I worked with 25 years ago. The company was working on the leading edge of circularity thinking, and I kept coming back to this beliefs question because although they're still, I would consider, be among the leaders in doing the right thing.
Right.
But the belief system is that the boundary of the business, once they've sold the furniture that they're making, is that's it. There's no more responsibility. So there's no sense of having any involvement in
Yeah.
return systems or anything like that.
Yeah.
And yet they're trying very hard to do the best they can within that boundary. But their belief system is that the boundary ends once I've made a sale.
Yes, indeed it does. And of course, as we know, that's the extended corporate responsibility, call it what you will,
Yeah,
is still something that they would spend a great deal of effort and resource trying to get out of.
yeah.
That's,
Well,
but
I guess
this is
that
what
brings you back to your political question
it
at
does.
the
It
beginning.
does. Exactly.
Where,
I
where
mean,
does the ultimate lever
yeah.
lie? Yeah,
And we can see that. It's perfectly clear, for instance, if you look at the whole electrical and electronic sector, none of those big companies would ever do anything about more circularity in their core product range unless they were being forced to by regulators. So the whole notion of repairability, for instance, which is a very important part of any notion of the circular economy, unless the EU pushes ahead with this directive that it has now, which will mandate
The right to repair.
the right to repair, and that will change the nature of the production system. So when they put their creative minds to work, they will have to design for repairability as well as design for profitability. Without the regulatory involvement there, they would never do it. They would never do it because it's going to cost them more to do it.
Right. And when it's a regulation, everybody has that tax or however you want to call it
Exactly.
To pay. So there's no competitive disadvantage.
Exactly.
Because it's across the board. Yeah.
Yeah. Level playing field stuff, which is very important.
Yeah. So you've today is obviously a day in the UK with the new Prime Minister. What change does that portend on the environmental front? Anything new, anything different, or more of the same?
I don't think it'll be anything very different. He speaks a different language. He's obviously much more approachable. People really like the directness with which he talks. And I think he's probably got a genuinely greater commitment to economic fairness. I'm not going to say social justice because I don't think he is a social justice warrior, but I think he would like the economy to be a great deal fairer than the one we have at the moment. He's been very cagey about what he wants to make happen on taxation, for instance, and he'll tread very carefully because of the capital markets and all that kind of stuff. So he's going to be better than Keir Starmer, who was a shockingly bad prime minister, Ken. I just want to make that absolutely clear. He really was. He'll definitely be better than that. But on the things that really matter, on whether he's going to make a proper showing around climate and nature, big question marks all round, whether he's going to do something completely different on the ongoing genocide in Gaza and change the Labour Party's disgraceful complicity in what is now indisputably the worst genocide that we've seen in this century, and possibly the worst since the Holocaust in the 20th century. On those big things, we don't get any indication that he's going to be any different anyway. So everybody's just being very everybody in the more progressive green left side of the political spectrum, everybody's being very cautious at the moment, saying, well,
we'll see.
Let's see. Yeah, exactly.
What's the mood in the UK and Europe about the US? It's not easy, being over here doing this work in the current climate.
I think it's pretty bad. I mean, nobody really wants to collapse into despair, but having to deal with not just Donald Trump himself in the White House, but of course the entire administration, which has been corrupted at every level by his choice of people to represent the US internationally. And you look at some of the ambassadorial choices he's made, you look at people like Pete Hegseth as the critical representative in terms of the defense. You look at J.D. Vance himself as vice president. These people have no interest really in building those profoundly important international linkages between America and Europe, and actually spend a great deal of time undermining them wherever they can. So the mood in Europe is really pretty down when it comes to seeing America as a useful ally in a world that is beset by so many different crises that we need as much solidarity as we can possibly get at this moment.
And what in a sense, what's happened to the United Nations? Has that disappeared as a force for good? Or is it just there?
Well, I suspect that what once looked like a very smart way of ensuring the powerful influence for the United Nations in all of those discussions that went on after the Second World War, where they created the Security Council, of course, with the 5 permanent members on the Security Council. And at the time, it looked as if that would actually make it possible for the UN to be an effective builder of international alliances and consensus and peace and so on. Of course, now the UN can't operate, because each of those permanent members can use its veto at any point, and anything to do with a consensus view emerging via the Security Council is impossible. I mean, the US constantly uses its veto at every turn to stop anything better happening from an international perspective. And Russia's not that much better. And, we've got a situation now where we're entirely stuck. And it's, I don't know, root and branch reform of the United Nations. Are you a kind of keen enthusiast on that score, Ken?
Um, no, I don't. I don't see much hope for that.
No, exactly. I
You
know.
know, I don't think it's even an accessible organization to be able to try and influence. I mean, I wouldn't know where to begin, to be honest.
No, it's tragic, though, watching the consequences of that for many of the world's peoples today. I
Yeah,
mean,
yeah,
the UN can't even get into Gaza at the moment. The
yeah.
Israeli Defense Forces continue to oppress 2 million citizens in Gaza, and we still can't get an official UN presence in Palestine at all, not on the West Bank, not in Gaza, not in East Jerusalem. So they are left at the mercy of the Israeli Defense Forces, which have been bolstered by this so-called peace agreement that Donald Trump came up with in October last year. And the
Right.
Board of Peace, which he saw as a substitute to the UN, which of course has done literally nothing, nothing to
Well,
support
again,
the.
it's the choice of people who are on it too, right?
Yeah, I mean, if you look at that, it's pretty shocking, isn't it?
Yeah, 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 yeah. It sort of speaks for itself. Yeah.
It does. It does. Yeah.
Do
So in
you? You
terms
know,
of
I
the,
get a sense that there's sort of like an inherent tension that individuals have. That on the one hand, their own personal beliefs tend to be more pro-environment and pro the things that we stand for, and yet just living in the world is seems to be a tension that okay, I've got to make a living, I've got to work in this company or that company, and they're not sustainable. And some people choose to leave because that tension's too strong for them to hold. A different set of personal beliefs than the company beliefs. And others just seem to tough it out. Do you think we can break through as a collective group of individuals and come together?
I don't put any faith in the idea that it's people who are working for these big companies that will make a difference. I feel genuine sympathy for them. I think the moral dilemma for them when they feel this as deeply as I suspect we do. I really do understand how hard that is, but they're not going to be the people who make this change happen. That's going to come from a very different quarter. It's going to come much more through civil society organizations. It'll come much more through young people. I think that in many respects, we shouldn't look to the individual employees of large corporates around the world for any contribution to an alternative, more progressive society because they're not in a position to do that. I still have hope that it'll come from elsewhere, Ken, which is why I'm back in political campaigning. I'm
Hmm.
now
Hmm.
much more involved in campaigning around the climate and nature and obviously around human rights and Palestine. And these things give me hope because I can see the impulse there is untainted by what happens when you look to business to bring about those changes.
I mean, obviously, young people are going to be the next generation that's going to have to take up these
Yeah.
issues in one way, shape, form, or another. And you do get people standing up and speaking out, um, but often it seems like they have a megaphone, but then the voice fades. As you move away from the megaphone and the moment. And is the change really happening behind the
Well,
the vocalization?
if it isn't happening, I don't put that down to the failure of young people. I mean, as you know, my last book was based on working with 25 of the young campaigners for Just Stop Oil, a
Right.
controversial direct action civil disobedience organization, which of course had some real effect, as did Extinction Rebellion before that. It did change the position of the UK government. It raised visibility and knowledge about climate issues very dramatically here in the UK. So much so, of course, that the government decided that they did not want in any way to encourage that kind of political efficacy. So they started, under the Tories, started introducing one new legislative measure after another to make protest of that kind increasingly difficult. And an organization like Just Stop Oil, not just the young campaigners, but the older campaigners as well, has basically been policed into extinction. So it's not their fault that
No.
this isn't working. It's the fault of a government that decided the only way to impose its will was progressively to erode those basic human rights: freedom of speech, freedom of assembly, freedom of protest. So the only thing we can hang on to now is those rights being guaranteed by the European Convention on Human Rights, which, of course, for us here in the UK is a rather long way away, since we don't have quite the same ties to Europe as we once did.
Right. I know you were one of the earliest, I think, in the UK to, have an eye to over the pond and to the US, and you've spoken consistently, I think, about US politics in a way that I think most people in the UK don't. Um, do you have a sense that come November, we're only a few short months now away from the midterm elections? Do you think there's going to be a revolt and a
Well,
chance to stop
I
the
mean,
Republicans?
at the moment, Donald Trump is doing his very best to make sure that the outcome from the midterms in November is less damaging to him
Yeah.
and to the Republican Party than it would be normally. I mean, the lengths he's going to suppress voting rights, to gerrymander district boundaries, et cetera, is really shocking. And I don't see the Democratic Party at the moment as a particularly effective defense against what Donald Trump has been doing. But I can't believe there won't be a major swing away from the Republicans, weirdly, of Donald Trump's own making, because the principal cause of a lot of that disaffection now is the cost of living crisis, his complete inability to address inflation issues. I think the approval levels for what he's doing through the war in Iran is incredibly low, and most of the MAGA people have started to turn against Trump. So if he does lose badly in November, which let us sincerely hope he does, a lot of that will be down to him, not actually down to the other things that he might have been doing.
Right. Yes, we'll be waiting, I guess, with bated breath for the results that evening.
So will the whole of the rest of the world, Ken, because there's a very great deal riding on this.
Well, I'm going to be back in London in September. I'm going to be keynoting a conference, and I look forward to talking to more people about their views on these things, because something really does have to change. I mean, because there will be a reckoning at some point.
There will be a reckoning. It's hard to work out sometimes how quickly that reckoning may come, but I remember talking with climate scientists 20 years or so ago. I mean, Friends of the Earth was the first organization to launch a big global warming campaign back in the 1980s. But just thinking about more recently, the last 20 years, climate scientists, even 20 years ago, were still saying a lot of these changes are going to play out over decades, not over the immediate future. And you look at the discussion now, you look at the tone of what the scientists are saying. Everything has moved forward. Everything is now more intense, in our faces, more damaging, more problematic for politicians to deal with. So whereas once the political class around the world would have pushed the climate out to a second half of the century challenge, it is now right in our midst as a very serious...
Do you think the heat wave like you've been having in the UK? And
I think these
the question
are all
of, even can you exist in a British home that's 35 Celsius,
I mean, these are all contributing to a marked change of heart. And actually an interesting report recently about, opinions of people in the USA, where more than 60% of people do attribute these climatic extremes, particularly the wildfires, by the way, and the heat waves. They attribute those to climate change. And it doesn't matter how many times Donald Trump says climate change is a hoax. You've actually now got a majority of Republicans, 55% of Republicans, saying these changes are because of climate change. So he's so out of touch, even with people in the USA, let alone with people in Europe.
Putting tariffs on Canada because they have a forest fire.
Exactly. I know. We laugh away, but this
I
man
know,
really,
beneath the
the
laughter
absurdity
is a lot
knows
of
no
seriousness.
bounds.
Yeah, yeah.
Exactly. Exactly.
So
Yeah.
if you were to advise, someone generally, what can I do? I think this has been always been a difficult point for people. Is what can I, as an individual, do apart from casting my vote? I mean, what can you do? I mean, I look at myself. I'm in a relatively new apartment complex, and we have trash fairies. They come at night, and the trash disappears. I pay $40 a month for the trash fairies, and we have this wonderful system. It's called single stream recycling. In other words, everything's in one bin. I mean, it's
Yeah.
the
Yeah.
antithesis of everything we need to be thinking about. And yet here I am talking about these questions. There are very practical parts to this that I think people struggle with on a day-to-day basis.
There are. I mean, and it's ridiculous that these lifestyle issues should still be so problematic for people. Um, Again, that comes down to the political systems that make it difficult for people. And really, we shouldn't be looking to change society through individual action, but individual action is a critical part of a wider process of change. I mean, my advice, for what it's worth, Ken, has always been don't try and do anything on your own. Always join with others in making change bigger and more effective, because that's the way things can be accelerated. But apart from the energy issues, the other area that people are very reluctant to get into is the fact that we still live in a world where the meat intensity of our diets, the per capita meat consumption, is far too high for a sustainable planet. And if one person wants to do one thing, it would be to reduce their meat consumption by half and then see if they can reduce it again. And I'm not necessarily advocating that everybody has to become a vegetarian or a vegan,
Right.
but reducing the amount of dairy and meat-based protein that we have in our diets, that would be a massive change. It really is. It really is.
Well, Jonathan, thank you. I appreciate your time so much. I appreciate your wisdom and your continued dedication to all of these important causes.
Well,
Thank
Ken,
you
it's
very
been
much.
very good catching up with you as equal warriors over many decades.
Yeah, well, we do what we can,
We
and
do what we can. Exactly that.
I would love to send you a copy of my books. Should be ready shortly, and I
Wonderful.
welcome your perspective. One of them is on AI, by the way.
Oh,
It's
right. No, I will be interested in that, as I'm a bit of an AI fatalist, in that I think if the climate doesn't get us first, then AI definitely
well,
will.
the
So,
title of the book is perfectly wrong.
right. Good.
AI gives you such a wonderfully concise and readable and believable answer to whatever you ask it.
Yeah.
And yet nobody tends to ask the question, well, where did it get its source material from? And obviously,
Exactly.
I've been asking all of the AIs for several years since ChatGPT first came out. Questions around sustainability and the environment. And from my perspective, at least, such as it gets it perfectly wrong.
Absolutely.
Um,
Good.
it's
Well,
not
I
a
shall.
surprise, really, is it? When you have a large language model that
No,
scrapes
precisely.
everything from everywhere, the good, the bad, and the ugly, and
Yep.
then you expect to pick out the correct nuggets from this morass of whatever it is they've got.
Exactly. I know.
So,
Well, I'll look forward to that one, Ken, and the other
all
one,
right.
no doubt. Yeah.
Thanks very
Brilliant.
much. I
Nice
appreciate
to
the time.
talk.
All right.
Radio.
Bye bye.
Bye.